In Port Clyde, Maine, a heavy fog clung to the harbor like breath on cold glass. The waves crashed restlessly as if they were trying to drown a secret. At the far end of the dock, a solitary figure sat still. Luther Merrick, 76 years old, wrapped in silence and salt air. His fishing rod rested on one knee, untouched, his eyes sharp, steady, cut through the mist like sonar piercing the deep. People called him crazy, a harmless old man, wasting time, hogging the same spot on the dock every morning, mumbling to himself over frayed nautical charts and a rusted spyglass. They scoffed, they filmed him on their phones, they laughed. But no one saw the faded tattoo on his wrist, a seahorse curled around an anchor. No one noticed the way his hands trembled. Not from age, but from years of guiding sonar equipment through pitch-black waters where every sound could mean life or death. He wasn't fishing. He was watching, and out in the fog, a nameless boat drifted just beyond visibility, calling him back toward a truth that might shake this quiet town to its bones. That spring morning, the harbor looked like any other. Fishing boats rocked on slow swells, and the wind from Penobscot Bay carried the scent of brine and rotting wood. Luther sat beneath the shadow of his old baseball cap, its fabric stained by time. His body remained still, but his eyes moved constantly, scanning the horizon not for fish, but for something hidden, something only he might recognize. Port Clyde knew his name, but no one understood his silence. To them, he was just crazy old Merrick, the man who never smiled, the man they said was chasing war ghosts. Children ran by shouting, "Look, the Navy man's hunting sharks again," before darting off into the shops. Locals complained tourists didn't like the sight of him. He ruined the cheerful postcard image. "That guy's bad for business," muttered the coffee shop owner, pointing at Luther without a hint of shame while he hunched over his battered spyglass, whispering to his chart as if it still spoke back. They didn't know that the same man who now spilled coffee with trembling hands had once tracked enemy submarines beneath thousands of feet of water, using nothing but instinct, sonar, and nerves of steel. They didn't know he once led a scan that saved an entire special ops team from vanishing into the deep. They didn't ask, and he didn't tell. One morning, a group of tourists paused nearby, snapping photos of him like he was part of the scenery. A middle-aged man in a whale print t-shirt laughed as he raised his phone. Catch anything today? Old-timer, or just fishing for memories? Luther didn't answer. He rolled up his sleeve for just a moment, exposing that same faded tattoo, the mark of his service. The man didn't even glance at it. None of them did. They turned back to the lighthouse in the distance, laughing, clicking, walking away, leaving Luther alone with the cold and the tide and the weight of all he remembered. Farther down the dock, two fishermen tied off their boat and whispered under their breath, "He's always out here, never brings back a single fish. He's just useless." Luther heard them. He always heard them. But his face gave away nothing. His eyes, dark and calm, flicked from boat to boat, measuring the shapes, the courses, the way the water shifted beneath their hulls. He saw things no one else did. Because the water wasn't just water. It was a language, a living map, full of signs and signals and pulses only a trained mind could feel. He didn't come here to fish. He came to stand guard just like he had for 40 years after the war ended, because, in truth, the war had never truly left him. Footsteps creaked across the wooden planks behind him, but Luther didn't move. The rod stayed perfectly still, like a soldier's staff driven into the earth. Inside him, a tide of memories threatened to rise, but he held them back, clenched beneath his ribs, locked behind that steady stare. The harbor buzzed with normal life. Laughter, seagulls, the engine of a tour boat sputtering to life. No one noticed that just feet away, a man sat waiting, not for a fish, not for the company, but for a signal from the sea. Something he had been waiting to see for a long, long time. It was a rare afternoon in Port Clyde, no fog, no wind, just the still surface of Penobscot Bay stretched out like a sheet of glass. Luther Merrick sat in his usual spot at the end of the dock, a wooden chair older than some of the boats in the harbor. His fishing rod lay untouched beside him. He wasn't here to fish. His eyes, cold beneath the shadow of his faded cap, were fixed on something offshore. A small, silver-white boat glided across the bay. It had no name, no numbers, no flags. It was the fourth time he'd seen it in 2 weeks, and this time it moved differently. It wasn't trolling or drifting like the others. It moved in sharp Z patterns, cutting against the tide like it didn't care. Its radar blinked once, then vanished, then blinked again, not constant. Just enough to tell someone who knew what to look for this boat didn't want to be tracked. It would disappear into the mist, then reappear from an unnatural angle, playing hide-and-seek with the shoreline. Luther leaned forward. Slowly, he unfolded a hand-drawn nautical chart from the 1980s, its edges worn. The ink faded, but the currents and reefs were still clear. He ran a finger along his pencil marks. Compare them with the boat's path. His jaw clenched. "That's not fishing," he muttered under his breath. "That's evasion tactics." He stood with care, the weight of his years making each movement deliberate. On the one hand, he carried the rusted spyglass that had outlived the ship it once belonged to. Through its clouded lens, he watched the boat come to a stop near Marshall Point Island, right where the current was strongest. No nets, no rods, no lines in the water, just anchored, waiting. It was too familiar, too precise. He remembered nights in the Caribbean aboard a vessel, cloaked in silence, maneuvering the same way to avoid sonar detection. His heart didn't race, but a cold instinct rose inside him, the kind that had kept him alive when silence could kill. He tucked the chart into his coat and turned away from the sea. At the Coast Guard station, the young officer behind the desk looked up and smirked. "What now?" "Merrick ghost ship again." Luther said nothing at first. He placed the chart on the table, pointed to the route. "It's not fishing," he said quietly. "It's running recon loops. Check the movements." The officer laughed. "Come on, old man. No smugglers or kidnappers out here. You're being paranoid. This is Port Clyde, not the Gulf." Luther didn't argue. He just looked him in the eye long enough for the smirk to fade. Then he turned and walked out. Shoulders slightly hunched, but his steps still carried the weight of command. That evening, the sky bled into orange as the sun dipped below the hills. The wind moved through the trees, and tension moved through town. Word had spread. 2 boys, 10 and 12, were missing from Thomaston, just 30 miles south. Witnesses said they'd last been seen near a fishing port, maybe talking to someone on a boat. No one knew the details. No one connected it to what Luther saw, but as sirens flashed in the distance and parents called out names that went unanswered. Luther sat alone at the dock, his eyes fixed on the water. He didn't speak. He didn't move. The spyglass rested in his lap, and beneath the glow of the setting sun, the seahorse tattoo on his wrist, once vibrant, now barely visible, seemed to flicker with every beat of his heart. He knew that the boat wasn't innocent. And no matter what they called him, madman, relic, fool, he would not let the sea lie to him again. Night fell hard over Port Clyde. The fog rolled in thick, swallowing light and sound alike. Waves crashed against holes with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Wind howled through the forest of masts like a voice trying to speak through time. Inside a small wooden shack on the edge of the harbor, Luther Merrick knelt on the creaking floorboards, his face lit by the flicker of a dim oil lamp. Shadows danced across his worn features as he pried up an old plank. Beneath it a rusted steel safe, untouched for decades. His hands trembled, but not from weakness. They moved with memory, with purpose. The lock turned with a metal groan, like a whisper pulled from the past. Inside, time sat still. A folded sonar chart, edges yellowed, a makeshift signal flare, a battered civilian radio, its wires frayed like veins, laid bare. He set them gently on the table, opening the chart under the lamp. Its ink, though faded, still traced the underwater terrain around Marshall Point Island, the reefs, the currents, the drop sites no one spoke of anymore. He stared long and hard at a single cluster off the island's eastern point. It used to be a supply drop during the war. Covert missions. Silent dives. He could almost hear the thrum of his own breath beneath the surface. His team swimming in black water, guided only by sonar and trust. That same rhythm, the one he once used to outmaneuver enemy radar, was what he'd seen today. The boat's sharp turns, its vanishing radar. It wasn't a coincidence. It was training. He clipped the small signal flare to his cap, slung the rusted binoculars around his neck, and stepped out into the night. The dock creaked beneath his boots. In the end, his old wooden rowboat waited like a sleeping animal. He untied it with slow care. From across the harbor, a bait seller called out through the fog. "Where you going?" "Merrick, it's night, who do you think you are?" Luther turned just once. His voice didn't waver. "I see what others ignore." Then he climbed in, pushed off, and the oars dipped quietly into black water. He rowed, without hesitation, towards the reef cluster, toward the place. No one in Port Clyde dared approach at night, but Luther knew it like breath, like blood. The tides tugged at the boat. Fog swallowed the shoreline. Still, he pressed on, through the binoculars. He spotted it, the silver-white boat, nameless, anchored, watching. Its radar blinked faintly, just enough to let him know it was still awake, still aware. He watched and waited. He traced the patterns in his mind, calculated distances, light angles, and radar delay. It was perfect, too perfect. Its looping path left no trace, and its anchor point, the exact spot he once used to deliver crates that were never meant to exist. He let the oars rest across his knees. His body is still, his mind is alive. The tattoo on his wrist, a seahorse curled around an anchor, shimmered faintly in the moonlight, pulsing with memory. He'd made a vow once in waters far warmer than these. No man left behind, not ally, not enemy, and certainly not children. 2 boys were missing from Thomaston, and out here, the sea was whispering their names. He didn't need the town to believe him. He didn't need the Coast Guard's permission. The sea had always spoken to him clearly, and tonight he would listen. Night devoured the reef cluster off Marshall Point Island. Waves pounded the rocks below, rising and falling like something ancient, angry, and alive. Luther Merrick lay low against the cliffside, his lean frame pressed into the wet scrub, binoculars gripped tight in his weathered hands. The glass was scratched, cloudy, but through it. The silver-white boat emerged from the mist, anchored just as he expected. Its deck light blinked faintly, flickering like a heartbeat on life support. He adjusted the focus slowly and carefully. His eyes scanned the deck, and then he saw them, Two boys, no older than 12, bound at the wrists, sitting near the bow. Silent, still, their faces pale, their eyes are wide with fear. No one stood guard, no weapons in sight, just the sound of water slapping wood and the current pulling around the hull. Then the cabin door creaked open. A man stepped out, broad shoulders, bald head, arms wrapped in black ink, tattoos tangled and angry. As the moonlight hit his face, it revealed a long scar that carved down from his left eye to his jaw. Luther's breath caught, his chest tightened. "Tyler Gage," he whispered. The name tasted like rust and old betrayal. Years ago, he had trained that boy, a promising special ops recruit during the Caribbean campaign, smart, fast, precise. But on the night it mattered most, Tyler had vanished. Mid-mission. A false signal. A broken chain of command. Two men didn't come home, and while the court spared him, Luther never did. Not because he ran, but because he never looked back. Now, that same man stood at the helm of a nameless boat, gliding with moves Luther had once drilled into him. Sonar evasion, looping patterns, silent radar. But this time, he wasn't evading enemies, he was hunting children. Luther lowered the binoculars. His hand brushed the faded seahorse tattoo on his wrist, and with it came the weight of an old vow. No one was left behind. Not in the waves, not in the dark, not ever. Ghosts from years ago stirred inside him, men he lost, men he couldn't save, but he locked the memories down, burying them behind a soldier's stare. He backed away from the ridge, crouched low, keeping to the dark. His mind began to move, not in panic but with focus. Tyler wasn't alone, but only he and the boys were visible. If the Coast Guard came now, it would take 10 minutes, maybe more. That was too long. Too many things could go wrong. He needed to act. To keep Tyler in place, to break his loop, and maybe to remind him of what he'd tried to forget. Luther's hand found the oar beside his hidden rowboat. His eyes flicked toward the reefs, where the tides shifted hard. A plan took shape, quiet, clean. No violence unless Tyler forced his hand. Tactics returned like breath, the kind only taught in shadows, the kind that got men home. Tyler might not remember him, but Luther hadn't forgotten a thing. And tonight, under this fog, he would make him remember. Waves slammed against stone, salt stinging the air. Luther crouched lower. Almost invisible now, his outline lost in brush and rock. The man Tyler once mocked as the hard-ass was here, watching, calculating, not for revenge, but for justice. The ocean kept its secrets well, but tonight it wouldn't be alone, because Port Clyde, beneath its fishing village quiet, had become a battlefield. And Luther Merrick, ghost, soldier, sentinel, was going to war. Waves roared against the reef cluster off Marshall Point, wind whipping in from Penobscot Bay like a blade. Luther Merrick rode quietly through the dark, his small wooden boat gliding like a memory over black water. In his coat sleeve, a knife waited, its edge dulled only by age but still sharp enough to finish what needed finishing. Ahead, the silver-white boat floated in silence. On its deck, two boys sat huddled hands bound, faces pale beneath a flickering deck light. Near the bow, Tyler Gage stood watch, broad, scarred, unaware that the man who taught him everything was now just 50 yards away. Luther lit his signal flare just once, a flash across an old rescue frequency. Civilian band, not traceable. If his old teammate near the harbor still kept a receiver by his window, he might have seen it. But Luther didn't wait for backup. He couldn't afford to. The flare was a gamble. The rest was him. He rode slower now, let the current carry him, His boat drifted close to Tyler's. Quiet, intentional, from above. The smell of burnt fish chum made Tyler wrinkle his nose. Through the binoculars, Luther saw him wave to someone inside, a silent order. Pull the old man aboard. A hook dropped. Ropes groaned. The rowboat bumped gently against the hull. Tyler leaned over, voice flat, lost. Old man. Turn around or bleed. Luther stood slowly, gaunt, silent. His hand clutched his chest as if weak, but his eyes steady locked onto Tyler's. And then came the whisper. Remember the last man who took a bullet for you. The air froze. Tyler's jaw twitched. The scar on his face pulsed. Recognition hit like cold water. But by then it was too late. Luther moved fast. The blade slipped free. One cut and the anchor rope snapped. His fingers flicked a hidden whistle, one sharp burst into the night. Then he reached for the rudder and twisted it hard. The flare, tucked in the rowboat's stern, ignited, lighting the mist like fire. The vessel spun, bow slamming against the EF with a wooden crack. On deck, the boys cried out, but their ropes, already cut, fell loose. Luther pulled them over the edge, one after the other, into his boat. Tyler roared, charged, and then light. Searchlights tore through the fog, slicing it clean. The Coast Guard patrol boat surged in silent no longer, guns drawn, voices sharp. Tyler stopped, hands twitching, no fight left. They boarded his ship, found forged ferry tickets, surveillance gear, plans, evidence of something larger, but no weapons. He'd planned to vanish, not kill, and now he'd do neither. The boys cold. Shaking, clung to each other on the Coast Guard deck. One reached out, gripped Luther's sleeve. "Thank you," he whispered. A young officer turned, stunned. How the hell did you even know Luther stood in the rain? Coat soaked through, seahorse tattoo shining wet under the light. His voice came low, even, because traitors always leave a pattern. And I never stopped watching. He didn't look at Tyler, now cuffed and hauled below. He didn't look at the crew, still stunned by what they'd just seen. He looked to the sea now, quiet, its surface is smooth, as if finally at peace. As he rowed back to Port Clyde, the fog returned. Soft, familiar. No one knew what he'd done. No camera recorded it. No medal would be pinned. But when he reached the dock and tied off his boat and sat again in that old wooden chair, the silence felt different. He wasn't alone. The sea had spoken, and tonight it answered. Morning light broke through the fog, casting a pale gold over Port Clyde's old harbor. Waves lapped gently against the moored boats, and gulls called across the stillness. Luther Merrick sat at the dock's edge in his same wooden chair. Worn smooth by years and salt, his old cap shaded his face, weathered by sea and silence. The fishing rod beside him lay untouched. As always, since the night he faced Tyler Gage and brought two boys home, he had said nothing. No press, no medals, no story. He returned quietly, just as he'd left. But Port Clyde noticed. The whispers started not in newspapers, but in coffee shops and among fishermen tying ropes. The same men who once mocked him now nodded in quiet respect. The children who used to giggle and call him names now stood still when they passed, eyes wide, unsure of what to say. They no longer questioned why he sat there. They simply knew he was there. One day, someone raised a small wooden sign behind his chair. No dedication, no name, just 5 words carved deep and simple. The silent water's guardian needing no name. Luther read it once. His fingers brushed the seahorse tattoo on his wrist, but he didn't speak. Word spread he never fished, that he never had, that he came each day to listen to guard, to keep watch, just as he did during his special ops years when each sonar ping could mean life or death. On that fog-bound night, the sea had spoken, and he'd answered. People saw him sometimes, unmoving, eyes fixed on the horizon, his hands are till, his face is unreadable. No one disturbed him. The chair bore an invisible weight. No one sat in it. No one dared. It wasn't just Luther's seat. It had become something more, a symbol, a sentinel post, a place where memory lived, and silence spoke louder than words. Even tourists sensed it. They glanced his way, uncertain, and perhaps they left with something they couldn't name, a quiet understanding that honor doesn't always come with ceremony, and loyalty can exist without applause. The days passed. The fog rolled in and out, bringing salt and memory. Luther sat through them all, his silhouette etched into each sunset like a promise held. He needed no statue, no eulogy. The sea knew who he was. It remembered the vow he kept, the one that said, "No one gets left behind." And when the day came that he no longer arrived, the chair remained, empty, still, unmoved. And yet it said everything, not in words, but in silence. If this story moved you, share it, so that men like Luther Merrick, those who stand guard without need for praise, are not forgotten. Tell us who taught you what loyalty means, whose silence shaped your life. Your words are waves, and some stories deserve to echo forever.